The calibration strip on the central console shifted half a millimeter to the left. It didn't slide. It corrected itself. Then it returned to its original line. No one touched it. Mara had her hand hovering above the interface, fingers slightly curled, waiting for the system to confirm a simple request. The strip stayed still now, aligned with the grid etched beneath it. Perfect again. She lowered her hand without pressing anything. Across the chamber, Island was still reading. Not from the console, he preferred printed sheets. Thin, translucent material, edges marked by hand. He turned one page, then paused, as if the next line required more time than usual. Mara stepped back from the console. She didn't look at him yet. Latency, she said. Island didn't answer immediately. He adjusted the top sheet, aligning it with the one beneath. The corners didn't quite match. He nudged them until they did. System response is within acceptable range, he said, eyes still down. Mara glanced at the calibration strip again. Then why did it correct twice? Now he looked up. Correct what? She didn't point. Just watched the strip, as if expecting it to move again. It didn't. Elin stood, slow and deliberate. He carried the sheets with him, keeping them pressed together between his fingers. When he reached the console, he didn't touch it. He leaned slightly, enough to see the alignment markers. They're stable, he said. Mara nodded once. Then, after a moment, she placed her hand flat on the surface. The system lit beneath her palm, a request for simple, routine, logged 100 times before. The response came before the request finished displaying. Mara lifted her hand. The calibration strip remained perfectly still. Island set the sheets down beside the console. The top page had shifted again, just slightly off-center. He didn't fix it this time. Neither of them spoke. Above them, the chamber lights held steady. No flicker, no dimming. Still, Mara took a step back from the console. Not far, just enough to no longer touch it. Island watched the strip for a few seconds longer. Then he reached out, not to the console, but to the edge of the printed sheet. He aligned it once more, carefully. The printed sheet didn't hold its position. Island had pressed the corners flat. The surface beneath it was smooth, unchanged. Still, the top edge lifted by a fraction, then settled again, not curling, not folding, just not where he left it. He didn't touch it this time. Mara had moved to the side terminal. Smaller interface, fewer variables. She tapped once, then waited with her hand resting near the input field, not on it. Run a passive check, she said. Elin didn't respond. He was watching the sheet. It shifted again, not outward, inward, toward the center, as if the page had reconsidered its own boundary. He slid it back into place. System logs are clean, Mara added, more to the room than to him. The terminal responded. No delay, no overlap. Too precise. Mara narrowed the query, limited the request to internal timing, sequencing, order of operations. She didn't rush it. One step, then pause. Another step. The output appeared before the final command registered. She exhaled through her nose, barely audible. Sequence mismatch, she said. Island looked up. Where? She turned the terminal slightly so he could see. The lines were intact, no errors flagged, but the timestamps didn't follow each other. One entry ended. The next one had already begun. Not early, not late. Out of place. Island stepped closer. He didn't lean in this time, just stood beside her, hands still. Overlap? He asked. No, Mara said. Displacement. He read the sequence again. Slower. The order was correct. The events were correct. The spacing between them wasn't. Behind them, the main console remained active, idle but aware. The calibration strip still aligned with the grid, untouched since before. Mara reached toward it, then stopped short. Instead, she looked at the floor seam beneath her feet, a thin line dividing two panels. Perfectly straight, she shifted her weight. The seam didn't move, but for a brief moment, it didn't meet the edge of the console above it. Then it did again. Mara didn't speak. Elin followed her gaze, then looked back at the terminal. Day 30, he said quietly. Mara nodded once. Neither of them returned to the main console. The room held its shape, just not its order. The council chamber was already in session when they arrived. No one acknowledged them, not directly. Seats were filled in the usual arrangement, circles within circles, each delegation positioned by distance rather than status. The humans had been placed near the inner ring, close enough to be seen, not close enough to interrupt. Mara paused at the threshold, the door behind them sealed without sound. Island stepped forward first. He carried nothing this time, no sheets. His hands stayed empty, relaxed at his sides. He took the assigned position without checking the marker beneath his feet. Mara followed, but she didn't stand still immediately. She looked at the central dais. Something about the light felt measured, not dim, not bright, just fixed. A speaker from the outer ring was mid-sentence. The translation field rendered the voice into a neutral tone, stripped of texture. It should have flowed evenly. Instead, there was a small hesitation between phrases, like a breath taken too late. Mara glanced at Ilan. He didn't look at her. His attention stayed on the speaker. The hesitation came again. Same length, same place in the sentence structure, even though the words had changed. Mara lowered her gaze to the floor. The circular pattern beneath the chamber seats was intact, concentric lines intersecting at precise angles. She followed one of the lines outward with her eyes. Halfway to the outer ring, it shifted, not visibly, not enough to draw attention, but it no longer connected to the next segment. It corrected itself a second later. Mara blinked once, slowly. At the center, a console note activated, a request for input. The usual sequence would call each delegation in order. It skipped one, then returned to it, as if nothing had happened. No one reacted. Island tilted his head slightly, not confusion, measurement. Mara stepped forward, just enough to enter the edge of the response field. She didn't speak. The system registered her presence anyway. Her name appeared in the queue before her turn. Then it moved back down the list. Island shifted his weight, subtle, controlled. The floor line beneath him held steady. Not random, he said, barely audible. Mara didn't dance. At the center, the speaker continued. Same tone, same pace, same delayed breath. The chamber remained orderly. Only the sequence kept slipping. They left before the session ended. No one stopped them. No one marked the exit. The corridor outside held the same steady light as before. White panels, narrow seams, evenly spaced. Mara walked slightly ahead this time. Not fast, just enough to lead. Island followed, counting steps without moving his lips. At the third junction, Mara stopped. There was a wall terminal set into the panel, smaller than the main console, fewer permissions. She placed her hand near it, not touching. Local time check, she said. Elin nodded once. She tapped the surface. The display appeared. Clean, minimal. Station time, 14:22,008. Mara watched the seconds. 14:22,803. Mara watched the seconds. 14:22,000 delayed. It occupied the same space, then moved on. 14:22,000. Mara withdrew her hand. Elin stepped closer to the terminal. He didn't interact with it. Instead, he looked at the seam where the panel met the floor. A thin line, darker than the rest. He placed the edge of his shoe against it. Step across, he said. Mara did. 1 foot over the seam, then the other. She stopped. Again, she stepped back, crossed it once more. The terminal behind her refreshed. 14:22, 12:12. No missing second, no repeat. Mara turned, looked at the display. Now, Elin stepped across the seam. The terminal flickered not visually but in response timing. The numbers advanced before settling. 14:22:14 skipped. He didn't look at the screen. He looked at Mara. Position, he said. Mara nodded. They moved together now, not fast, measured. 2 steps forward, pause, 1 step back. They crossed the seam again. This time, the terminal didn't update at all. The time held, 14:22, 14922. 1:14. Mara raised her hand slightly, then lowered it again without touching anything. Island shifted to the side, aligning himself with the edge of the panel. Not system-wide, he said, local. Mara glanced down the corridor. Empty, triggered by us. Island didn't answer immediately. He stepped away from the seam, The terminal resumed. 14,022.15. Mara watched it change. Then she stepped forward again, slower this time. The seconds stretched, not longer, just slower to arrive. She stopped mid-step. Elin observed her foot, suspended just above the seam. Neither of them spoke. After a moment, Mara placed it down. The time corrected itself. Clean, continuous. She looked at Elin. He nodded once. Then, both of them stepped back from the terminal, not touching it again. They returned to the chamber later, when it was empty. No session, no voices. Just the low hum of the station, holding its own rhythm. The central dais was inactive. The seating rings dimmed to a softer tone, as if the room had relaxed without observers. Mara stopped at the edge of the inner circle. Island continued to the center. He didn't step onto the dais immediately. He walked around it once, slow, following the circular line embedded in the floor. His eyes tracked the pattern, not the room. At one point, he paused. The line beneath his foot didn't quite meet the next segment. He waited. It corrected. Then he stepped forward onto the dais. Mara watched from where she stood. "Try sequence," she said. Elin didn't respond. He placed his foot down fully at the center. The chamber lights adjusted, not brighter, just earlier than expected. Mara noticed it. She shifted her weight but didn't move closer. Elin raised his hand slightly, as if about to gesture. The system activated before the motion completed. A response field opened, empty, waiting. Elin lowered his hand. The field remained. Mara stepped into the inner ring, but not onto the dais. "Don't initiate," she said. Elin nodded once. He stood still. The field flickered not visually, but in presence. It seemed to recognize an input that hadn't been made. A name appeared, not spoken, not requested. Mara Ellen. She didn't react immediately. Island looked at the display, then at her. "You didn't enter," he said. Mara shook her head. The name remained for a moment, then shifted. Not erased, replaced. Mara Elin. Confirmed. Mara stepped back, one foot leaving the inner ring. The field didn't close. Island moved his hand slightly, testing. The system responded again. Ahead of him, another entry formed. Incomplete, then completed itself. He stopped moving. "Not prediction," he said. Mara watched the field. "Then what?" Elin didn't answer. He stepped off the dais. The response field lingered a second longer than it should have. Then it closed. The chamber returned to its quiet state. Mara remained where she was, just outside the inner ring. She looked down at the floor line again. It held, perfect. She didn't step forward again. They didn't report it. There was a channel for anomalies. Standard protocol. Mara opened it once, let the interface load, then closed it without submitting anything. Instead, they returned to the small terminal near the corridor seam. Same position, same light. Island stood slightly to the side this time, not crossing the line. Mara remained behind him. "Baseline," she said. Elin nodded. He stepped forward. The terminal displayed time immediately. 14:41 Theosissance due clean. No delay. He stepped back. Mara moved past him, slower than before. She didn't look at the screen yet. She crossed the seam with one foot, then paused, her weight balanced. The display held 14:41,002. A second passed, or didn't. Mara lowered her foot fully. The time advanced. 14:41,360. She watched it for a few cycles. Steady again. Elin adjusted his position by a fraction, aligning himself with the edge of the panel. He didn't cross. "Not constant," he said. Mara shook her head. "Not location either." She stepped back from the seam. The terminal continued normally. Elin looked down at the line between the panels, then at Mara. "Sequence follows us," he said. Mara didn't answer. She turned slightly, looking down the corridor. Same empty stretch, same evenly spaced lights. She took a step forward. Nothing changed. Another step. Still nothing. Then she stopped. Behind her, the terminal refreshed. Not early, not late, just out of order. 14:41,007, 14,006. Mara didn't turn around. Elin did. He watched the numbers hold in that arrangement for a moment longer than they should have. Then they corrected themselves. Clean again. He looked back at Mara. She hadn't moved. Her posture was steady, but her hand hovered slightly away from her side, as if she had stopped midway through a motion and decided not to finish it. Elin stepped away from the seam entirely. The terminal continued without interruption. Mara took one more step forward. No visible change. The corridor remained straight. The lights held their pattern. She exhaled softly, then lowered her hand. Behind them, the terminal displayed time as expected. Ahead of them, the floor lines met exactly where they should. Mara didn't test it again. Island didn't suggest it. They walked on, keeping their pace even. Not fast, not slow, just enough to stay in order. Neither of them looked back.